Sometimes love isn't enough. As an adoptive mom, people would often say this to me, as if to imply I couldn't love my son enough to change behaviors or heal his trauma, so I should probably just give up. At least that's how I took those four powerful words, which had buried themselves deeply in my mind, leading me to doubt my ability to parent my child. Sometimes love isn't enough. That is the truth. Oftentimes, you need love and powerful, personalized tools to raise a child who's experienced trauma and disrupted attachment, or a child who you're struggling to connect with. I am on a mission to help parents raising kids with a tricky past to show up with unconditional love and practical tools to lovingly manage even the most challenging of times. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Plus, if you like what you hear, I'd love for you to leave a review. Now let's get to the good stuff. Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. I'm your host, Angie Grandt, and for today's discussion, I want to talk about trauma. What is trauma? So today in this episode, we're going to dig into what exactly it is. And in upcoming episodes, we're going to talk about some really key strategies about things that we can do about it. But let's start first just discussing that word. Trauma is so frequently used in today's society. Some professionals or experts will provide statistics indicating that anywhere from 40 to 60% have experienced some level of trauma during their first 18 years. That's the most recent statistic that I've heard. Others will say that it's closer to 80%. I think in order for us to really understand and give a number to it, we have to understand what exactly is trauma. I know when I first heard this word in becoming a licensed foster parent, a lot of the training was around this topic of trauma. And in my mind, it was anything that created a pain or an injury, some type of neglect, perhaps, to a child, at least in thinking about my foster training. I looked at trauma as something scary that had happened to the child that has shifted the way that they view and interact with the world and the people in their world. And, in the past few years, as I've been digging back into trauma, when I think back to, I don't know, 10 or it was probably about 15 years ago when I first became licensed as a foster parent, I looked so differently at trauma. I looked at it as an event or a series of events, and that itself was the trauma, right? If a child suffered abuse or neglect, or if there was a significant disruption in attachment. But something about it didn't make sense to me because we all know people who were at the same event, but had a very different response to it. And this didn't quite make sense to me, right? How can, hundreds of children all be in the same school during a scary event and have such different responses to it? It's easy to assume that children will a have a negative response to such an event. For example, if there were a fire at a school, right? The children there will have a different response to it. Or I think about divorce, right? A lot of families now in today's society experience divorce, but the kids will have such a different response to that same event. I know in my family, when my parents got divorced, my brother and I had a very, very different response to that, a very different reaction to not only the feelings that we felt, but the way that we expressed it out in the world. So what is it that my definition of trauma was missing? Like I said, when I first looked at trauma, I looked at it as the event that had happened, but the trauma isn't the event. So I thought, well, I've been studying a lot, but I thought for the sake of this podcast, why don't I just look it up, right? Here are a couple of things that I came across as I Googled, what is trauma? Well, one site says that trauma is when we experience very stressful, frightening, or distressing events that are difficult to cope with or out of our control. It goes on to describe that it could be one incident or a series of incidents. Another resource says that it's an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, crime, or natural disaster. Reactions like shock and denial are pretty typical. And then a third definition that I came across says the word trauma literally means wound, shock, or injury. A psychological trauma is a person's experience of emotional distress resulting from an event. When I look at all of these examples of trauma, I still don't see that they encompass the the, the person at their core. So I decided to dig deeper, to learn more, to understand better what exactly is trauma. As I've been working with my coach, she describes trauma as any event or sequence of events that causes us to feel unlovable or question our lovability or to question our sense of self-worth. When I heard that, I thought, wow, that's the piece that's been missing. That's the piece that wasn't there when I was trying to wrap my head around what in the world is trauma. When we think about, what you've experienced in your life, or in particular, when we're looking at our kids and what our kids have experienced in their life, our kids who we know come from a tricky past, I really encourage you to wrap your head around that thought. Any event that causes our kids or ourselves to question our lovability or a sense of self-worth. When we really reflect on the things that have happened to us or have happened to our kids and look at it through that lens, look at it through how could a divorce impact our child's sense of lovability? How could a disrupted placement, our kiddos going into foster care or going into an adoptive situation, how could that cause our kids to question their lovability or their sense of self-worth? When I really wrap my head around this and think about the experience that I've had, not only as a mom, but as a coach working with families who are raising kids from, from a tricky past, this resonates with me so much. When I really think about at the core of what the struggles that I've seen in kids who have experienced disrupted placement, disrupted attachment, it's that. It's that questioning whether or not they're lovable, lovable enough to keep, lovable enough to stay with their biological family. And I know I talk with so many parents who talk about, they say, but I adopted my child from day one, right at the hospital. How could they possibly question their lovability? Well, we know and research shows us that there's a bond between parent and child long before they, enter this world. There's a bond between parent and child while they're in the womb. And when that bond is broken, those smells, those sensations, those hormones, when that is no longer there, we know that that has a profound impact on our children. And I now see it so clearly that it's that sense of lovability, that sense of self-worth. When I as I've been digging a little bit deeper, like I said, this piece makes so much more sense to me when I really think about that lovability piece. But I did also come across some other interesting work by a very well-known psychiatrist who specializes in the area of trauma. And I also really like how he broke it down too. So when I was looking at with Dr. Bruce Perry, and I was looking at the work that he does in the field of trauma, he also describes that trauma really is three E's. He looks at it as the event, the experience, and the effect. So let's think about that for a second, right? When we think about our kids who've experienced a disrupted attachment, kids who've been placed for adoption, placed into foster care, moved from one home to another during a divorce. That's the event, right? That placement, that that moving from one home to another, even if that move happens the first day they enter this world, that's the event. That second piece is that experience. How does that child experience it? And like I just mentioned, when we think about the experience that the child has had up to that point, so perhaps their experience was in the womb and hearing mom's voice, other family members or friends' voices. Maybe they were hearing scary things while they were in the womb, but that was their experience. It is how that child processes that event, how they experience it, that then leads to the effect that it has on the child. For some kids, it leaves them in this high state of arousal. It has a profound, this, this event, this traumatic event, this disruption can have a profound impact on the biology, the neurobiology of our children's brains. When our kids experience this disrupted placement early on, research now shows us that it has an impact on the hormones that are released in our children's brains and the impact that it has on other biological responses in their body. We're going to talk in some upcoming episodes about what that really looks like, but for now, I just want to plant that seed that when we think about trauma, whether it's in ourselves or in our kids, and we really wrap our heads around, Dr. Bruce Perry's work in breaking it down into those three parts of event, experience, and effect. And then really wrapping our head around that effect is an impact on our child's sense of lovability, their sense of self-worth. When we put those pieces together and really reflect on what our kids have been through or what we as parents have been through in our own lives, when we really wrap our heads around that and take a step back to look at our kids through a different lens, it helps us to see the behaviors that we're struggling with are a direct reflection of what they've been through. So in some upcoming episodes, we're going to be talking about this. Trauma is going to be our focus for a little while because I I'm I just know that it is my purpose on this planet to help shift the needle when it comes to trauma. I know that I've experienced what I've experienced and have met the families that I've met because it is my role to help shift that. There's far too much trauma happening in society, and the cycle continues. Whether a child is stays in a biological home where they're perpetuating the cycle of trauma, or a child is placed in a new environment where their constant state of arousal creates this tornado of behaviors around them that ends up perpetuating the trauma nonetheless, just in a different way. I know that when we as parents have the right tools and the right approach to shift the way that we respond to our kids, we have the power to change the narrative. We have the power to shift the way that we show up for our kids to help change the next generation. So, for today's episode, like I said, I really wanted to get you to really think about trauma, to think about it less as an event or something that happened, and think more about it as what is the impact that it had on you or your child? How did that event or sequence of events, how did that impact your child or impact you? Because that is where the work has to happen. If we are to change the outcome, change the behaviors, change the interactions and the connections with our kids, we have to be able to look at their trauma for what it is so that we can shift it. So, I hope that you found this episode powerful, and I really look forward to helping to continue to walk this path of trauma with you so that we can start changing the narrative for our kids, for ourselves, and for future generations. So, we will talk soon. And if you're ready to start digging in with your family and getting some really personalized support, check the show notes. I have all the ways to contact me, and I would love to help your family to start to shift the narrative too. All right, take care, and we will talk. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. Thank you for joining us for Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. If you resonated with what you heard here, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. You can also follow us on all the socials. Check the show notes for all the details about how to start tackling behaviors and creating a powerful, loving relationship with your child, a child who needs your love the most. And if your gut's telling you that it's time for a change now, book a free consult. I'd love to help you love unconditionally and show you that you have that power within you.